In a quiet corner of Tamale City, where everything still holds the silence of unsaid pains, a mute boy draws on an abandoned wall where the fire within him never ceases to burn. His strange, wordless drawings are screams of anguish, the deep yearning that cannot be voiced from his lips. A painting drenched in blood, a work of art that is not just about beauty, but the very soul of those forgotten, those denied by the world. And from there, an unstoppable story begins. The story of Kweku, a boy living in silence, yet making the whole world pause to listen. Can his silence break the barriers this world has built? And can the wall where unspoken souls are set free change an entire life? Prepare for a journey full of intensity and haunting beauty, where every painting is a piece of painful truth and healing. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping episodes to come. Night falls hard on Tamale. The sky is a blanket of thick clouds pressed low over the city, like it's trying to suffocate the light. In the distance, a train screams its arrival. Metal clashing air brakes, hissing the earth, trembling beneath the weight of something that never quite stops. By the cracked edge of the old station wall, a boy sits alone. He is 12, small for his age, barefoot knees drawn up under a faded t-shirt that used to be white. His name is Kweku, and he does not speak. The concrete beneath him is cold and jagged, but he doesn't flinch. In his hand is a piece of yellow chalk worn down to a stub. On the wall before him, a wild tangle of lines and shadows is taking shape. A face with no eyes, a mouth stretched into silence, a hand reaching towards something invisible. Around it swirls of fire circles, within circles symbols that could be pain or language or both. A gust of dry wind lifts the dust and coats the air in reddish haze. Kweku doesn't blink. He is not drawing for anyone else. He never has. A motorcycle passes its headlight, briefly illuminating the wall. The driver slows for a moment, stares, then shakes his head and drives off. Another whisper spreads. That's the mute boy who draws demons. It's not the first time they've said it. Back at the shack behind the tracks, 4 wooden walls, a roof patched with sheet metal and plastic. An old woman stirs a pot of porridge over a coal stove. Her eyes keep glancing at the door, her brow lined deep from years of worry. She is Kweku's grandmother. She raised him since his mother drowned in the Volta River 10 years ago. The porridge boils, and she turns off the fire. Outside, a shadow passes. Kweku enters, covered in chalk dust. His eyes don't meet hers, but she doesn't need them to. She knows that look tight across the brows, the jaw clenched like he's biting back a scream no one would ever hear. Again. She kneels in front of him, wiping his fingers gently with a wet cloth. The calluses on his small hands tell a story no child should have to carry. "You were at the wall again?" she asks softly. He doesn't nod, doesn't shake his head, just stares at the floor. She cups his face, rough thumb against his cheek. "It's okay. Draw if you must. Just don't forget to eat, eh?" He sits. They share a bowl. The radio in the corner plays static, then clears for a brief moment to the voice of a gospel preacher screaming about salvation through fire. She turns it off. Later that night, under the dim flicker of a hanging bulb, Kweku takes out a crumpled notebook. Inside, hundreds of sketches, some pages ripped, others stained, all intense. Every page seems to scream in silence. And every time he finishes one, he tears it out and folds it into a square. He walks outside again. The wind has died. The trains are gone. He slips through the alleys, quiet as a spirit. Back at the wall, he tapes the folded paper into a crack like he's feeding it to the wall itself. Because he doesn't just draw on it. He talks to it. And maybe it talks back. Morning. The sun rises brutally, casting gold and fire across the train tracks. School uniforms shuffle past the station, dusty shoes dragging. Laughter rises, but not the good kind. 3 boys walk behind Kweku. Their shadows long, their tongues sharp. "Hey, mute boy, you conjuring spirits again. He probably cursed his own mama, that's why she's gone." Laughter. Then one pushes him. Kweku stumbles but doesn't fall. He simply walks faster. They follow. One of them pulls out a crumpled sketch from his bag, stolen from Kweku's notebook days ago. Look at this. Is it a face or a devil? He spits on it. They tear it in half and toss it into the gutter. Kweku stops. His fists tighten, his shoulders rise. For a second, everything in him wants to scream. But nothing comes, just the boiling in his chest. That night he draws something different. A child with no mouth, surrounded by hundreds of other children, each with a mouth, each laughing. One by one, they turn into birds and fly away. The silent child remains tied to the ground by invisible strings. Days blend into each other. The trains keep coming and going. So do the stairs, the whispers. But his wall grows fuller, stranger, more alive. There's a figure he draws often, now a dog with 3 legs and a single staring eye. No one else sees it but him. Until one night, the dog appears for real. A thin, mangy black dog limps out from the shadows and curls up next to him as he draws. He watches Kweku without blinking. Kweku stares back uncertain, but the dog doesn't move. He drops a scrap of bread beside him. The dog eats, then lays its head on Kweku's leg like they've known each other forever. The next morning, the dog follows him all the way to school. The teachers try to chase it away, but it returns and sits and waits. Must be a cursed thing, one mutters. They don't understand. No one does. That night, Kweku names him Sabi. It means the one who knows. Because somehow this creature, broken and unwanted, knows exactly how it feels to be him. Back at home, his grandmother watches them through the kitchen window. She does not shoo the dog. She simply turns back to the pot, stirring gently, then calls out without turning her head. You don't need to speak, Kweku. Just remember what I told you. He looks up. She turns, smiles weary but warm. Cháu không cần nói. Chỉ cần để tim lên tay. He nods almost imperceptibly. Then he goes back to the wall, Sabi at his side. This time he draws a boy standing tall with fire pouring from his chest, eyes closed, hands open. The fire stretches out and shapes itself into wings. And beneath it, for the first time, Kweku writes something. Not in chalk, in paint, red raw and unfiltered. Listen to the silence. It's screaming. The wall now breathes with pain and wonder. And far away, in a city he's never seen, a man flips through his camera searching for something real. He's about to find it, but Kweku doesn't know that yet. All he knows is that when he draws, he breathes. And tonight he's finally alive. The sun of Tamale does not rise gently. It burns its way up the sky, swallowing shadow with an intensity that feels personal. The wall, once a forgotten slab of cracked cement, is becoming something else. Each morning now, before the world fully awakens, Kweku is already there, chalk dust on his fingers, his eyes locked in a trance. He doesn't smile. He doesn't hum. He breathes in rhythm with the lines. Today a new figure emerges. A person without a face. Not blank, not erased. Simply, not there. Floating above the body are 2 eyes, too wide, too real. They stare directly outward, seeing what they shouldn't. Watching something inside Kweku. He draws a second figure, small, huddled arms wrapped tightly around knees. From its chest a flame bursts forth, not like a torch but like a scream frozen in fire. It burns upward into the wall, twisting into something like wings, but misshapen. Broken. Then comes the dog. He draws it with 3 legs and a head cocked sideways. Its single visible eye is clear, intelligent, almost sad. The stump of the 4th leg isn't grotesque, it's proud. Survived. That night, as he finishes the drawing and steps back, something shifts. A shuffle in the dirt behind him. Kweku turns. From the edge of the shadows near the tracks, a dog steps forward. Real. Black. Thin. Limping. Its ribs visible beneath its matted fur, its gait uneven. But its eyes are exact. It walks slowly, carefully, as if not wanting to scare him, and then without hesitation lies down right beside him. Kweku doesn't move, doesn't speak, only watches. The dog does the same. Minutes pass, hours blur. He gives it a crust of leftover bread. It eats without frenzy, as if it knew he'd offer it. That night, Kweku does not draw. He sits beside the dog hands in his lap. The moon above them is crooked and pale. It does not judge. When he returns home, his grandmother is waiting with her arms crossed, worry etched like stone into her face. "Where were you?" she asks, though she knows. He writes something in the dust on the table, "Friend." She sighs long and heavy like a woman who's seen too much. Then she nods. "If it has found you, maybe that means you're ready." He doesn't ask what she means. He just watches the flame in the coal stove flicker. The next day at school, it begins again. In the courtyard, under the neem trees, a group of boys corners him. Their leader, Kobe, a boy with a chip on his shoulder and something cruel behind his smile, holds Kweku's sketchbook like a weapon. "You think you're special because you draw nightmares," he says. Kweku reaches for it careful. Kobe yanks it back. "You think drawing makes you somebody? You think you matter." Then a rip. The sound tears something deeper than paper. Pages scatter across the ground, twisted limbs, faceless figures, fire silence, laughter, mocking sharp. One of them pushes Kweku from behind. He stumbles. His foot slips on wet stone. He falls hard into the narrow drainage ditch. Mud splashes. His elbow scrapes against rusted metal. His shirt tears. They leave him there, soaked and shaking. He doesn't cry. He doesn't scream. He stares up at the sky, empty, endless, unforgiving, and swallows whatever tried to come up his throat. That night he returns to the wall. The dog is already there. It limps to him and sits. Kweku opens his satchel, pulls out a thick charcoal stub, presses it to the wall like it's his only weapon. He draws a snake, not just any snake. Its body wraps around a human figure, tight, constricting. The snake's eyes are human. Its fangs drip something black. Its tongue pierces the person's throat, coils up into the open mouth. The person's eyes are wide, terrified, alive. Above it he writes not words but symbols. His own code. Angled lines, crossed circles, sharp cuts. It isn't language. It's warning. The dog sits still, not blinking. When Kweku finishes, he doesn't step back. He kneels, places his hand against the snake's eye, closes his own, and breathes. Somewhere deep in the night, thunder rolls far in the distance. But no rain comes. The wall watches. In school the next morning, he keeps his head down. The teacher talks. The students laugh. Someone throws a crumpled piece of paper at the back of his head. He doesn't flinch, because he has something they don't. He has the wall. And now he has Sabi. The black dog waits outside the school gate, curled beneath a broken bench. Every day. Rain or heat, it waits. And when Kweku walks out, it follows. Silent, loyal, a shadow that protects. At night, the wall grows more violent. His drawings darken. The symbols get sharper. The figures become distorted. One night, he draws a boy peeling off his own skin to reveal another boy inside, screaming without a mouth. Another night, he draws a spiral of eyes, hundreds of them, all open, all weeping. He draws until his fingers bleed from pressure. He doesn't stop, because when he draws, he's not broken. He's whole. His grandmother begins to notice the change. His hands are always stained now. His food goes uneaten. His sleep is shallow. She watches him through the curtain as he sits in silence, petting Sabi's head. And one night, when he doesn't return at curfew, she walks to the wall herself. What she finds stops her heart. There's her grandson standing before a towering image of himself, screaming with eyes shut, flames bursting from his chest, while shadows behind him try to smother the fire. And next to it, a dog. Wounded, fierce, glowing. She doesn't speak. She only cries. Not because she understands, but because she finally sees. The silence was never empty. It was full, and it was screaming. Kweku sits under the wall that night, longer than usual. He leans against Sabi's warm side. The night is cool. The trains rattle in the far-off distance, but he doesn't move. Because something is shifting. Something is coming. And deep within him, a voice stirs, not a sound, not a word, but a call. The kind of voice that doesn't come from the throat. It comes from the soul. The sun in Tamale doesn't set gently. It slashes the horizon in orange and gold, dragging long shadows across the dust roads like bruises on the earth. Nana Mensah stood beside his rented car, sweat sliding down his temple, his camera strap digging into his shoulder. The northern heat hit different. It wasn't the kind that asked permission. It invaded, burned, and stayed. Still, there was something about the way it clung to the skin, how the light bounced off corrugated rooftops and dry neem trees that made him pause. He wasn't lost, not exactly. But his GPS had died an hour ago. And Tamale wasn't in a rush to guide him. He'd come north seeking something raw, something unfiltered. Accra was too polished, too polite. Nana wanted the bones of Ghana, the places that hadn't yet made it onto canvas, the soul beneath the dust. He parked near what looked like an abandoned train station. A wall stood across the tracks, cracked, discolored, but covered in drawings. Not murals. Screams, that's what they looked like. He squinted under his sunglasses, already halfway to a photograph, when he saw the boy. Kneeling, focused, drawing with furious precision, hands flying over the concrete, as if racing something unseen. Nana stepped closer, dust crunching underfoot. The boy didn't turn. The drawing was only halfway done. But it stopped Nana in his tracks. A hand, rising from a dark, swirling mass, water or shadows, or something deeper. Fingers splayed in panic or prayer or goodbye. And above the hand, just barely sketched a second figure with its back turned, walking away. The image hit Nana like a wave in the chest. He'd seen violence, grief, protests. He'd painted war and reconciliation, shot portraits of widows in Makola, of child soldiers in Sierra Leone. But this wasn't documentary. This was pain. Pure, personal, unfiltered. And it was coming from a child who hadn't noticed him standing 10 feet away. Or maybe he had. The boy finished a line, then dropped the chalk and stood. Still didn't look at him. Instead, a dog, thin, black, three-legged, rose from the shadow beside him and took a step forward, placing itself between Nana and the boy. Not growling, not threatening, but watching, testing. Nana raised both hands slowly. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not here to harm anyone." The boy tilted his head, expression unreadable. The dog didn't move. Nana took a cautious step forward, eyes never leaving the wall. "Did you draw this?" Silence. "Of course." But the boy's eyes flicked just once to the drawing. And that was answer enough. Nana pulled a camera from his bag, not the digital one. An old Leica worn from years of war zones and art shows. He held it up like an offering. "May I?" Still no words. But the boy didn't stop him. Click. The shutter sound cracked the silence. Then a voice, hoarse and deliberate, cut through the air behind them. "He doesn't speak." Nana turned. An older woman stood in the shade of a neem tree, wrapped in a faded kente cloth apron, hands white with cornmeal. Her eyes were sharp, her body tired. She looked like someone who had spent her life protecting things no one else could see. "I'm his grandmother," she said. "We live just over there." She nodded toward a shack near the rail line. Nana stepped forward and bowed slightly. "My name is Nana Mensah. I'm a painter from Accra." She didn't smile. He continued. "I didn't mean to intrude. I got lost. But I saw what he was drawing and He stopped. The words felt too soft. So he changed tone. "He's brilliant." She raised an eyebrow. "That's what the church said." Until they called it witchcraft. Nana didn't flinch. "I've seen a lot of things," he replied. "This is not madness. This is art. Unfiltered. Alive." The woman crossed her arms. "You want something," she said. It wasn't a question. "I want to teach him," he answered. "Not to change him. To give him tools. Paint. Canvas. Oil. Let his language live where others can feel it." "He doesn't need your city paint," she snapped. "He has his chalk. I'm not here to take him anywhere. Just to offer space to grow." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned her gaze to the boy. Still standing, still silent, still drawing in his head. The dog took a few steps forward, sniffed the cuff of Nana's trousers. Then with a motion slow and deliberate, it bit the edge of his shirt sleeve. Not hard, not angry. Just tugged once, then let go. Nana looked down, then back up. The boy's lips curved just barely. But the grandmother saw it. And for the first time, her posture softened. "His name is Kweku," she said. Nana smiled. "May I come back tomorrow?" She sighed. "If the dog lets you live, maybe you're meant to." She turned to leave. The boy stayed. Nana knelt beside him. They didn't speak. But something passed between them. Not words. Recognition. That night, Nana didn't sleep. He set up his easel in the small guest house he'd found 2 roads down and painted by candlelight. He painted the wall, the hand in the water, the boy standing at its base, faceless, mouthless, glowing from within, and beside him, a dog, whole, proud, watching. The title, Things That Shouldn't Be Forgotten. And in his mind, one thought beat steady as a drum. He hadn't come north by accident. The dust had called him, and the boy had answered. The box sat in the corner of the shack, untouched at first. Nana had carried it in, like it contained something sacred, but Kweku hadn't moved toward it. He just sat, legs folded under him, watching from a distance, with the suspicion of someone who had learned not to expect good things to last. Inside the box, tubes of oil paint glass, jars of watercolors, sticks of charcoal so black they looked like broken night. Brushes of every shape and size, bristles soft and wild like the hair of some forest creature. Palettes, knives, canvases, tools, weapons, truths. Nana didn't speak, just knelt beside the box, opened it slowly, then stepped back as if unveiling a treasure. He didn't tell Kweku what to do. He simply waited. At first, Kweku circled it cautious. He reached for a brush, then stopped. Instead, he picked up the charcoal. Of course. He found a blank canvas leaning against the wall of the shack, and with one quick movement, he dragged the charcoal across it, not carefully, not thoughtfully, but with violence. The line snapped halfway through like it had been screaming. Then another line, and another. The boy moved fast, not thinking, not hesitating. His fingers pressed deep into the charcoal until the black bled into his nails. He didn't draw shapes at first, just tension. Then slowly forms emerged. Not bodies, fragments, veins, broken arteries, loops that started nowhere and led to nothing. It was as if he were mapping something under the skin of the world. Nana sat silently in the corner, not blinking. Kweku's hands moved like they had waited a lifetime for this. The way he tore through canvas, as if every second was a matter of survival. He didn't ask what was allowed. Didn't care what made sense. He just told the truth, in black, in silence. And then he switched to oil. The colors stunned him. He touched the crimson, first dipped one trembling finger into it, smeared it across the page. He froze. Nana leaned forward. The red smeared into a shape. Not a line now, but a wound. It curved, then split into two. Branches. Vessels. A heart. No, a scream. He dipped again into cobalt blue this time. Then yellow. The colors met on the canvas and collided like storms. No outlines. No logic. Just feeling. Within 30 minutes, the shack smelled like turpentine and fire and something bigger than both. By nightfall, he had finished his first real painting. It wasn't clean. It wasn't beautiful. It was alive. A cluster of faceless heads stacked on top of each other like a spine. Each had no mouth, but their eyes glowed red, gold, and deep ocean blue. The bodies were melting into one another, bones fusing, veins erupting like tree roots. At the base, a small boy curled in a corner, holding his own heart in his hands. Nana stood behind him, stunned. He had mentored many. Taught classes at the university, judged national exhibitions. But he had never seen a child draw like this. He picked up his phone, quietly filmed a 30-second clip of the painting. No filters, no edits, just raw. Then, with trembling fingers, he posted it to his artist profile online. Caption: He does not speak, but every nerve in his body is screaming. Meet Kweku. He didn't expect anything. He didn't need to. But within hours, the comments started flooding in. From Kumasi, from Cape Coast, from Lagos, from Berlin, from art teachers, gallery owners, poets, trauma therapists. Who is this child? This is not talent. This is soul exposed. I can feel this in my throat. Nana turned the phone toward Kweku. The boy didn't look at the screen. He was already working on the next piece. This time watercolor. He painted slower now. A child's silhouette floating above a shattered house. Strings tied to his limbs, being pulled in every direction by hands that reached from the sky. Nana watched him, and after a long silence said softly, "You don't need to say anything, Kweku." The boy paused the brush in midair. Nana's voice dropped almost a whisper. "But you're screaming with your hands." Kweku looked at him, not with a smile, not with pride, but with understanding, the way someone who's been underwater too long finally finds air and recognizes the man who handed him the rope. They didn't speak for the rest of the night. They didn't need to. The paintings would do the talking now, and the world was finally ready to listen. It began with a whisper. At the edge of a dusty Tamale marketplace, under a rusted radio tower, a man scrolled through his phone. The image flickered across his cracked screen, Kweku's painting. The faceless heads. The boy holding his own heart. The eyes that burned like omens. The man stopped breathing. His name was Kwabena. His son Daniel had suffered seizures since the age of 6. Lately, the episodes had worsened. 2 nights ago, he found the boy shaking in bed, screaming into nothing, eyes fixed on the corner of the room. That corner, Daniel claimed, was full of mouths. When Kwabena saw the painting, those very mouths, those very eyes, something inside him cracked. "This is witchcraft," he muttered. He clicked through Nana's post. He saw the name Kweku. He knew the boy, the mute child from the station wall. The one who stared at people without blinking. The one the market women had always said saw things. He stormed home, printed out the painting, and took it to the elders. "This is what cursed my son," he said. "This boy draws devils. The man from the south, he's feeding him." The murmurs spread. By sundown, there were 20 of them, men with tired eyes, women clutching crosses. One man with a Bible so worn, the spine looked like it bled. They stood before the wall in silence. First confronted not by demons, but by raw pain, raw humanity. But none of that mattered. They didn't see art. They saw threat. One woman stepped forward and drew a red X across the center of the newest painting with a trembling hand. Another followed, painting a second cross with charcoal. Soon the wall was bleeding. Painted curses, marks of judgment, written scripture. Kweku arrived late. He stopped cold when he saw them. He froze at the edge of the alley, clutching his satchel. His chest rose and fell with uneven breath. Sabi trotted beside him, wagging his tail once, then stopped too, sensing something wrong. Then the shouting began. "There he is. Bring that boy forward. You'll answer for the evil you've spread." Kweku backed away, but the crowd surged. Sabi stepped in front of him. Someone picked up a rock. Another shouted. "He cursed his own mother. Now he curses our children." The stone flew. Sabi jumped. It struck the dog in the ribs. A yelp tore through the chaos like a knife. Then another blow. A stick. A kick. Screaming. Kweku collapsed to his knees, clutching Sabi's body, shielding him as the world raged around him. The dog whimpered. Blood pooled under his fur. That's when Nana arrived. He didn't run. He walked straight into the center of the mob. "Enough," he roared. His voice cracked across the crowd like thunder. "You shame yourselves. You attack a child for telling the truth with paint. You call pain evil because you're too afraid to name your own." Someone lunged at him. He didn't flinch. "I've painted wars. Genocide. You know what always comes before it: fear and silence. And mobs who call truth darkness because it reflects what's inside them." The crowd wavered, but the fear remained. "You feed him dark spirits," someone yelled. "He feeds himself," Nana replied. "From what life gave him. A dead mother, a mute voice, a town that spits on what it doesn't understand." They didn't care. They turned, left in silence. But the damage had already been done. The wall was desecrated. The dog was bleeding. The boy's was shaking. Later, in the dim light of the shack, Nana packed his brushes. "I should go," he said. "I've made this worse for him." Kweku sat on the floor, rocking slightly, clutching a blanket to his chest. Sabi lay beside him, still breathing barely. The boy hadn't cried. But his eyes were no longer there. They had receded deep into a place no voice could reach. "I brought attention," Nana whispered. "And I brought danger." Beneath the window, the grandmother stirred her stew slowly. The smell of ginger and garlic filled the room, but no one could eat. She didn't look up as she spoke. "If we leave truth behind every time it gets misnamed, then what kind of truth is it?" Nana didn't answer. She turned to face him. Her eyes gleamed not with anger, but with steel. "Do you know how many nights I prayed for someone to see what I saw in him?" she asked. Nana swallowed. "I was scared too," she continued. "Scared when he started drawing. Scared when people whispered. But I was more scared that no one would ever hear his soul." She stepped toward him. "If you go now, what do you teach him? The truth is only good when it's easy. That silence is safer." Nana looked at the boy. at the dog, at the wall still faintly visible through the cracked window. He sat down, unpacked the brushes, and said nothing more. The wind carried the river's voice that day, soft at first, like a song hummed without melody. But beneath it, something darker, something deep, slow, and final. The current of the Volta did not scream. It simply pulled and took. The memory came in fragments. Kweku's bare feet pressed into soft mud. His small hands clutched the edge of a white cloth. His mother's scarf. She stood at the water's edge, swaying. Her voice drifted across the surface, not loud, not broken. Gentle. A lullaby stitched in minor chords. A song for someone not yet asleep. She wore yellow that day, her favorite color. Her hair was tied back, her face too still. Mame, the boy had tried to say, but no sound came. He was only 2. The words hadn't formed yet. Or maybe they had, and life had silenced them before they reached air. She turned once, looked back, and smiled. It wasn't peace, it was surrender. Then she stepped forward. 1 foot, then the other. The river welcomed her the way it always did, with soft hands and no judgment. Her song disappeared into the ripples. Kweku didn't run, he didn't cry. He stood at the edge, eyes wide, arms limp, the scarf still in his fist. He watched until the yellow vanished, until the silence became permanent. Years later, he woke with sweat at his brow and the taste of iron in his mouth. His chest rose and fell like something was trying to break free from inside. He sat up. The shack was still. Sabi lay curled at his feet, wounded but breathing. The night outside buzzed with insects and thick heat. But the dream lingered, not the memory. The dream. Because in the dream, his mother had come back. Not from the water, from the wall. She stood behind the cracked concrete, her silhouette flickering like flame behind glass. She wasn't sad. She wasn't broken. She smiled, and slowly she reached out. Her fingers came through the cracks, through long, jagged fractures like knives, like ribs torn open, and she placed her hand on his head, not to bless him, but to acknowledge him, to say, "I see you now." That morning before the sun rose, he went to the wall. The village still slept. Even the trains had not yet begun to scream. He brought nothing but a brush and black paint, and he began, not with fire, not with pain, with her. He painted her eyes, first closed at peace, then her arms stretching forward, not to push him away, but to gather him close. Behind her water, endless, but not threatening. The water was quiet. The kind of quiet that holds truth, not absence. And between her and him, shards of glass. Cracks in the shape of lightning, slices of memory. He painted himself smaller than he ever had. A child crouching, arms around his knees, but looking up, always looking up. And at the very top of the wall, in the narrowest space between 2 fractures, he painted a white scarf caught mid-air, as if the wind had never stopped carrying it. When he finished, he stepped back. Sabi, despite the limp, had come with him. The dog sat, head tilted. Kweku turned to the animal as if asking for judgment. The dog didn't move, just stared at the image, and then quietly lowered his head, as if bowing, as if mourning, as if remembering too. That afternoon, Nana returned to find Kweku sitting in front of the wall, staring at it like a chapel. He stopped mid-step when he saw the painting. He didn't ask what it was. Didn't need to. But something inside him shifted. It wasn't the boldness of it. It was the softness. There was grief here, but not rage. There was loss here, but not blame. Nana walked forward slowly, the crunch of gravel beneath his feet, the only sound. Then he whispered, "Who is she?" Kweku didn't speak. He only tapped his chest. Once, then pointed at the wall. Nana looked closer, a detail he hadn't seen. Near the mother's hand, painted so faintly it was almost hidden, was a symbol, a signature, a loop of white surrounded by 5 black dots, like a constellation or a silent name. For the first time, Nana didn't feel the need to share Kweku's work. Didn't reach for his phone, didn't snap a photo. He let the painting remain in that space between past and present, between memory and prayer. Sometimes the most powerful art is not meant to be consumed. It's meant to be survived. That night, Kweku slept beside the wall. Sabi curled into his side, guarding the boy, the only way he knew how, with presence. And in his sleep, Kweku dreamed again. But this time, the river was still. And his mother's song played not in sorrow, but in return. The decision came without ceremony. No big speech, no lightning strike, no sudden revelation. Just Nana standing in the doorway of the shack, one hand on the doorknob, the other holding a canvas, like a sacred object. "I'm taking them to Accra," he said, "and he's coming with me." The words landed like thunder in a still room. Kweku didn't look up. He was painting again, lost in his usual rhythm brush to wall breath, to silence. But his hand froze for a beat. His eyes flicked toward Nana, then back to the canvas. The grandmother stirred the stew slowly. Her face betrayed nothing. "You think that city is ready for a child like him?" she asked. Nana exhaled. "I think the city needs him more than it knows." She turned off the flame beneath the pot. Then, without a word, she walked into the back room. The floor creaked under her weight. A moment later, she returned carrying a small tin box. Dented, rusted at the corners. She opened it with both hands like it might break if rushed. Inside, 3 gold bangles, one broken at the clasp. "His mother's," she said, voice dry. "And her mother's." She closed the box again. "They're going." That evening, the 3 of them walked to the station. Kweku wore a pressed shirt, one of the few things in the house untouched by paint. Sabi limped beside him, bandaged but determined. The platform buzzed with heat and impatience. The train groaned like an old beast reluctant to move. As the engine coughed to life, Kweku climbed aboard. He didn't look back. Nana followed, carrying a portfolio thick with canvases, pain, grief, silence, fire, all neatly framed and stacked. The grandmother stood on the platform, back straight, arms folded. She didn't wave, but her eyes never left the train. And just before it disappeared, Kweku turned, raised his hand. She raised hers too. That was enough. The train cut through darkness like a blade through old cloth. Inside, the compartment rattled and hummed. Fluorescent lights flickered. The air smelled of metal and dust and distant rain. Kweku sat by the window, forehead pressed to the glass, watching trees blur into nothing. He didn't sleep. His eyes stayed wide, drinking in the moving world. In the reflection of the glass, he saw more than trees. He saw his paintings, but not as they were, as they breathed. The faceless figures moved. The boy holding his heart stood up. The woman in yellow stepped forward from the cracks in the wall. Behind her, a door opened in the sky, and from it a flood of white moths poured out, whispering in languages no one had ever written down. The train trembled beneath them, but Kweku was still, and for the first time he didn't feel trapped. He felt chosen. Accra hit him like heat to skin, louder, faster, hungrier. The streets didn't speak, they shouted. Buses screamed, horns bled into each other. People didn't walk, they collided. And the sky so wide in Tamale felt choked here by glass and smoke. But the gallery was still. An old colonial building turned art space, all white walls and track lights and wine glasses. It smelled like floor polish and quiet ego. Nana knew the owner, had pulled strings, had promised something they'd never seen before. They got a single night. "Make it count," he told Kweku. The boy didn't answer. He just began helping hang the work. They arranged them in silence. The faceless choir stood near the entrance. 8 heads stacked, eyes closed, no mouths. The heart that screamed followed. Then hands behind the wall. Then mother in yellow. And finally, near the back, the boy and the dog. Each piece had no description, no title plaques, just raw image, just truth. At 7 p.m., the doors opened. By 7:10, the room was full. Whispers, pauses, gasps. Some viewers wept openly. Others stared for minutes, unmoving, as if waiting for the figures to blink. A woman clutched her chest and whispered, "I've felt this before, but I never saw it until now." A man with calloused hands murmured, "This is how my son died." And still no one asked who the artist was, until they saw him. A boy, thin, silent, standing in the corner beside a dog who limped but never looked away. Someone asked, "Did you?" Kweku didn't answer. He just raised his hand, placed his palm on his own chest, then looked directly at the wall. The woman who asked nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. That was answer enough. By 10 p.m., every piece had a red sticker. Sold. Curators argued over commission splits. Critics whispered about raw genius. Some wanted interviews, photos, publicity. Nana refused them all. "This isn't spectacle," he told them. "It's survival." Back in the corner, Kweku sat cross-legged, feeding Sabi pieces of bread. The dog wagged his tail, slow but steady. Nana watched them, then looked out at the crowd, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Not the smile of success, but the smile of vindication, of something long buried finally being heard. And on the far wall, under soft white light, a painting of a scarf floated above a river. And the room stayed quiet just long enough to hear the silence speak. The applause hadn't even died down. The wine glasses were still half full. The smell of fresh varnish still hung in the air, and critics were still arguing softly near the back wall when it happened. A man stepped through the open doors of the gallery, not with hesitation, not with ceremony, with purpose. His coat was oversized. His eyes were swollen. His gait was wrong, like someone whose grief had collapsed his spine, but not his rage. He didn't stop to look at the paintings. He didn't ask for permission. He walked straight toward the wall where the faceless choir and the heart that screamed hung side by side. His hands moved quickly. The thud of a heavy can dropping to the floor. The sound of paint exploding on canvas, bright red, like blood, like warning. A gasp tore through the room. The man picked up another can. Splash. Screams, shouts. Someone lunged toward him too late. By the time security dragged him back, his arms were covered in red and his voice cracked dry rose above the noise. Like a cracked bell. "You did this," he shouted at no one and everyone. "You put it in my son's head." No one understood, until Nana recognized his face. Kwame Ankoma, former teacher. His son Joseph had taken his own life 4 months earlier. Left no note, only a sketchbook. Inside a final drawing, a spiral of faceless eyes, a boy holding a bleeding heart, a hand reaching from fire, almost identical to one of Kweku's earliest works. The gallery froze. Kwame's voice shook the walls now. He saw this filth online. He copied it, lived in it, died in it. "You call this art? It's poison." Nana stepped forward. "This boy doesn't know your son." "Exactly," Kwame screamed. "And still he killed him." Silence. Security pulled the man away. But the wound was done. The red paint dripped from the canvases like arteries cut wide open. They tried to recover. The gallery director apologized profusely. The staff offered to clean the works. Nana refused. "Let them bleed," he said. "Let people see what fear does." But the crowd had shifted. The energy was off now. And the critics began circling like flies to a wound. This is why art must have boundaries. Why was no warning posted at the door? It glorifies trauma. It triggers the vulnerable. This boy should not be seen as a voice. He's a mirror too sharp for children to survive. One by one, whispers became questions. Questions became doubts. Some buyers tried to pull out. Some claimed they'd been manipulated. Nana stood in the center of it all, jaw tight. But Kweku was gone. No one saw him leave. The hotel room was small, tidy, window open, fans squeaking softly overhead. He sat on the floor, knees to chest, palms flat on the tile. No drawings, no brushes, no sound. He hadn't spoken in 12 years. But now even his hands were mute. The knock came after midnight, soft, rhythmic, but he didn't move. Outside, Sabi lay curled by the door tail, barely twitching. The dog hadn't left his side since Tamale, and now with the hallway lights casting long shadows, he waited again. He didn't scratch, didn't whimper. He waited. Kweku leaned his head against the door, fingers splayed on the wood. And for the first time since he'd held chalk, he began to question whether silence was still his language, or if it had become his prison. In his mind, the red paint dripped again, this time from his own hands. In the void of the room, the words Kwame had screamed kept echoing. "You did this. You did this. You did this." He buried his face in his arms. And the room stayed still, and the dog stayed faithful. And the world once again became too loud to survive in, but too silent to leave. The hotel's courtyard was quiet at dawn. The first light hadn't broken yet. But the city was already murmuring beneath it, Akra's breath thick with dreams and dust and horn honks that never really sleep. Nana stood alone, leaning against a balcony rail, staring out at nothing. He hadn't slept. Not after the blood-red ruin of last night. Not after seeing Kweku curled in silence, paralyzed by a pain too old for his body. The silence wasn't beautiful anymore. It was dangerous. He pulled out his phone. Messages kept pouring in. Articles, photos. Some praising the work, others calling it irresponsible. One headline simply read, "Did this boy's art trigger a death?" He locked the screen. His hands trembled. Then a voice behind him, soft, steady. "You're asking the wrong question." Nana turned. The old woman stood barefoot, arms crossed in her shawl. Her silver hair caught the dim light like silk. "I didn't expect you here," he said. "I didn't expect to send him into fire either," she replied. They stood for a moment without words. The sounds of a waking city rose around them, birds' engines, water being thrown onto the pavement. Then Nana exhaled quietly. "Maybe I made a mistake." She didn't blink. Bringing him here, putting him on display. Maybe the world isn't ready. Maybe I gave them a mirror they weren't willing to look into. She stepped closer, looked him straight in the eye. "He's not a mirror," she said. "He's a wound that bleeds color. And wounds don't wait for permission to bleed." He swallowed hard. "I just thought maybe we could give him something more. A way out of the dark." The woman tilted her head. "And now you want to take him back into hiding?" Nana looked away. "Maybe that's what he needs. A break, a reset, somewhere safe." "Safe," she scoffed. "You think he was ever safe in Tamale? They called him a curse. A ghost. They beat his dog and blamed his silence for every bad wind. There's no safe, Mr. Mensah. There's only truth. And truth always bleeds." He was quiet. Then she added softer, "But you are right about one thing. The world isn't ready." He looked up. She nodded slowly. "But that doesn't mean he waits for it. He doesn't need their understanding. He needs to live, as he is. Not hidden, not apologetic, and not afraid." Her eyes shone fierce and raw. "Because silence," she said, "can lead too." Kweku didn't speak that morning. He just walked. Through alleyways still wet from the night rain, past market stalls still covered in blue tarps, under trees that held more memories than leaves. Sabi followed, limping with purpose. His bandages were loose now, stained with time. But he didn't slow down. They reached the same wall from the gallery's rear entrance, still scarred by red paint. Kweku ran his hand across the dried splatters. It cracked beneath his fingers, and then he set down his bag, unzipped it, pulled out a small canvas, unframed, raw. He sat cross-legged, knees against the ground, his face stone, his breath steady. Sabi lay beside him, and Kweku began to paint. No color this time, only shades, black, gray, white. In the center, a child barely formed. Small, genderless, mouthless. The eyes were wide but not fearful, just watching. Behind the child, the world was chaos waves, shadows, broken doorways. And in front of the child, something unexpected, a dog. But not like Sabi. This dog had no eyes. Its head tilted, its legs trembling, but it stood tall, proud, and the leash between them, invisible. A tether of trust. The child followed. The dog led, mouthless, sightless, but they moved forward anyway. When the painting was done, he let it dry under the rising sun. Then he took a pen and wrote something small in the corner. Not a title, a whisper. Silence can lead. That evening, Nana returned. He saw the boy asleep on the floor beside the painting. He saw Sabi curled beside him, and he saw the image. He didn't cry. But something in him broke and reset in the same breath, like a bone that had healed wrong, and suddenly for the first time was being set right. He leaned down, touched the canvas, and whispered, "Then we follow you." Tamale felt different now. The street still smelled of dust and diesel. The market still hummed with life, and the call of the train still rang through the town like a herald from some distant land. But something had shifted. Something subtle, like a shift in the air, just before a storm breaks. People walked a little slower, heads held higher. And the wall, the one Kweku had painted on for so many years, had become something else entirely. A place of pilgrimage. It started slowly at first. Just a few people stopped by, curious faces peeking through the alleyway, glancing at the art, then looking back at each other, unsure if what they were seeing was real. Some whispered, some smiled. Then, one by one, they returned, bringing their friends, their families. Soon the wall became a gathering place, where groups of people, young and old, came together to witness what had been left behind. The images, fractured faces, flames, hands, reaching from shadow, pulled them in like magnets. Kweku stood near the back of the crowd, quietly observing. Sabi lay at his feet, eyes closed, but alert, always watching. One day, as the sun dipped low, a group of students arrived, loud, eager, fresh from the bustle of Accra. They were excited, their laughter cutting through the heavy air as they rushed toward the wall. They came with cell phones, ready to capture what they'd heard about. And then, as if drawn by some invisible force, a girl in the back of the group stopped. She was quiet, too quiet. Her eyes scanned the wall, moving from one image to the next. She was different from the others. Not just in the way she stood still like she was listening to the wall, but in the way her hands twitched as though they were waiting for permission. The other students didn't notice. They were too busy taking photos, comparing angles. But Kweku saw her. He stepped forward, his footfalls barely making a sound on the cracked pavement. The girl was still standing, her hand now gently resting on the wall, as if she were feeling the pulse of it, understanding something that the rest of the world was missing. When her fingers traced a line near the base of the painting, something happened. Kweku didn't hesitate. He walked closer. "Do you want to add to it?" he asked, his voice soft, almost like a whisper. But it was enough. She turned to face him, her face open, vulnerable. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She nodded, and with a single motion, Kweku handed her a piece of chalk. No words, no explanations, just trust. The girl took it, and without hesitation began to draw. She started with a circle large and round, then quickly added several smaller ones inside. It was a pattern, a symbol, something that Kweku understood. She was creating a language of her own, just like he had done all those years ago. Slowly, she stepped back. Kweku followed her gaze, examining the new marks. The group of students had gone silent, watching now, intrigued by the quiet energy between the two of them. The girl smiled and pointed to a place on the wall where she had finished. Kweku knelt down beside her, and without a word began to add to it, filling in the gaps with soft, deliberate lines. The others watched, some with confusion, others with awe. Kweku and the girl didn't look at them. They were absorbed in their task, bringing their shared vision to life. When they were done, they stepped back. The painting stretched across the entire wall now. More than just the faces Kweku had started with, more than just the tortured limbs and burning hands. This new part was different. It was a symbol of connection. And above it all, in small, delicate strokes, Kweku wrote, "The Silent Soul." The girl stepped back and reached for Kweku's hand. He didn't pull away. He let her take it. The crowd was still. There was no applause, no cheering, just a quiet reverence. It was as though the very air had changed, and the wall, the paintings, the work had become something more than art. It had become a bridge, something that connected every soul who stood before it. As the evening settled, the students slowly dispersed, some still staring, others talking in hushed voices. But Kweku stayed. He sat down on the ground, cross-legged, and watched the wall. And beside him, as always, Sabi laid down his head, resting on Kweku's knee as if to say, "Mission complete." Kweku didn't know what would come next. He didn't know where this journey would take him, or if it had even begun to reach its end. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. The dog beside him, the crowd that had gathered, the girl who had reached out, it was all part of something bigger, something quiet but powerful. The sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the alley. The world might not have understood Kweku's silence. They might not have understood his paintings. But at that moment, standing at the base of the wall, with the weight of history and pain on his shoulders, Kweku understood one thing clearly: silence too can speak. Kweku sat quietly in the corner of the small art classroom, the hum of children's chatter surrounding him. The walls, once bare and cold, now displayed works from the new generation, pieces filled with color, emotion, and stories. The classroom itself, a humble room attached to the old wall, had been repurposed into a space for learning, a space for creation. The walls of the classroom were still heavy with the weight of their history, but now they were covered with new visions, new voices. The children in the room worked silently. The only sounds, the scratching of pencils on paper, the swish of brushes across canvas. Most of them were silent not by choice, but by necessity. Their voices had been stolen from them, by the world's cruelty or by the accidents of fate. But here in this room, they didn't need words to speak. Kweku watched them, his heart swelling with pride. Each child, with their own quiet struggles, was creating something new. Something that could be seen, something that could be felt. Some were painting bright colors. Others were sketching shadows, drawing faces, animals, abstract shapes. They worked at their own pace, their hands moving gracefully, as if they were telling stories with every brushstroke. Kweku didn't teach them. He didn't need to. He had already shown them that the absence of sound didn't make them invisible. That the silence in their hearts could echo louder than any voice could ever hope to. They learned through him not by his words, but by the work he had left behind. His art had given them a language to hold on to, a means to express what words could never capture. As the children painted, Kweku sat at the back of the room, sketching on his own. His eyes wandered to the window, to the fading light outside. The sun was beginning its slow descent into the horizon, casting long shadows across the floor. The quiet of the room wrapped around him like a blanket. Then the door opened softly, and a woman stepped inside. She was older, her eyes read a slight tremor in her hands as she held an envelope. She paused when she saw Kweku. Her gaze was soft, her face weathered by years of grief, but there was something in her eyes that made Kweku stand up. She approached him slowly, handing him the envelope with a quiet nod. Kweku took it, opening it carefully. Inside was a letter handwritten with deliberate care. "Dear Kweku, I wanted to write to you to tell you something that I couldn't say in person. My son Emmanuel is 9 years old, and he has never spoken. Since birth, he's been silent. We've tried everything to get him to speak, but nothing worked. He lived in his own world, disconnected from ours. When I saw your paintings, when I saw your wall, I didn't know what to think at first. But something inside me shifted. I brought Emmanuel here, and I asked him to look at the wall, to see the faces, the shapes, the colors, and for the first time in his life, he picked up a brush. He started drawing. Not words, but pictures. Not sounds, but something else. Something real. It's been weeks now, and he hasn't stopped painting. I wanted to thank you. Thank you for giving him a voice, a way to express himself. Because of you, he can speak through art. He may not speak with his mouth, but he is speaking now. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. A mother who never gave up." Kweku held the letter for a long time, staring at the words. His fingers trembled slightly, a weight settling in his chest. It was as though he had been given the thing he had always sought, but never realized he needed a connection to something beyond the silence. He looked up, meeting the woman's eyes. Her face was soft, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips, but her eyes were full of tears. She didn't speak, but Kweku understood. The silence between them was full of everything words couldn't say. He nodded slowly, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "Thank you," he whispered. The woman placed a hand on his shoulder, a touch filled with gratitude and understanding. She left him there, standing in the stillness of the classroom, holding her letter in his hands, like it was a map to something he had longed for, but never dared to seek. Later that evening, as the sun set and the sky turned from amber to violet, Kweku walked outside to the wall. It stood there silent and stoic, a monument to everything he had endured, everything he had lost, and everything he had found. The faces, the hands, the eyes, every mark had been made in silence. Every crack, every stroke of paint had been a cry for help. But now it was different. It wasn't just his voice anymore. It was the voices of everyone who had come after him. The children who sat in his classroom. The mother who had written the letter. The people who had stood before the wall and found something they couldn't say aloud. Kweku reached out and placed his hand on the wall, feeling the coolness of the cracked surface beneath his fingers. The sun cast a golden light on the wall, creating long shadows that stretched across the pavement. For a moment, everything was still, and in that stillness, Kweku felt something shift within him. It wasn't just the past that he was holding on to. It was the future of those who had yet to find their voice, the future of the children who would one day stand before this wall and find the courage to speak through their art. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the setting sun wash over him. The wall, the silence, the paintings, they were all a part of him now. They would live on long after he was gone. A voice echoed in his mind, not his own but Nana's. Not everyone is born to speak. Some souls, all they need is a wall to raise their voice. And Kweku smiled a small, knowing smile. He had found his voice. Through the wall, through the silence. And the world had finally begun to listen.